Hello and welcome to RHAP's coverage of Australian Survivor. I'm your host Shannon Guss, here for a little bit of it's off-season coverage, but we're still firmly in the post-season of Australia versus the World. Still doing a lot of post-season coverage on that. But we thought that we would get to this because we have had a lot of people who are new fans of Australian Survivor, who've maybe never watched any Australian Survivor, how dare you, and just checked out AUV World, or maybe have even checked out AUV World, but have just heard about it now because it's become even more of a phenomenon through AUV World and want to know, okay, what do I watch? There are a lot of seasons. The seasons are very long. What's worth my time? What isn't? We're here to steer the ship. And to do that, I do have the Australian Survivor to my very good seasons. Mike Bloom.
Hi,
Thanks for
yes.
being here.
Happy to be here. Thank you. Yes, welcome. Welcome aboard, I guess, the ship, to continue the metaphor, Shannon. Listen, there's some very good sailing that is ahead of you, people, and hopefully you don't have to pirate too much of it, for lack of a better term.
Probably you will if you're our target audience. If you are someone who watches Australian Survivor and wants to know how to watch US Survivor, you are in the wrong place.
Yes.
I will say, because I get all the questions. I get it from I get about international. I get Australians who haven't watched US. I get US fans who haven't watched Australia. If you're an Australian fan who's never watched US, Google Shannon Guss chart. I did that chart after season 40 with my recommendations, and then
Let
for the
me
new
actually
era,
Google, like, if I Google Shannon Guss chart, will it come up? It is. It's
it
the
will come up.
first thing on
Yes,
images.
I've Googled it a lot. A lot of people ask me for my chart, Shannon Guss chart. And if you want the new era stuff that has happened since then, I recommend 42, 45, 46, and 47. All right, now you can leave. You are in the wrong place.
You just did, like, if you're here for the wrong reason, let me give you what you need to know. Okay, now let's actually get to the reason why we're here.
I'll tell you why, though. It's because I do get a lot of these questions, and I try to respond to everyone. And I've gotten so many of these questions. So again, if you are looking for the US seasons, that's a blanket statement. But yeah, if you're an Australian Survivor fan, you're in the wrong place because we're here for the Australian Survivor newbies who've never watched Australian Survivor and want to know what to watch. And honestly, there are some bad ones out there, right? So like we're trying to help you out because there's also a lot of really great Australian Survivor, Mike. So yeah, what do you think about all of this?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, again, despite the fact that we, just finished this massively popular season, we're going to be a little bit in purgatory, for lack of a better term, maybe bring that element up later, when it comes to a next Australian Survivor season. But again, I think a lot of people are understandably jazzed on Australian Survivor, especially watching half the cast be made up of previous players. And I think there is a fair amount of people who were brought in by watching Suri and Parvati and Tony, and were like, oh, I really like these people. I really like JLP. I really like Australian Survivor, but I've never seen it before. And so, look, let's say up front here, this is not a guide of how to watch Australian Survivor. There are methods to do so that you can Google, much like Shannon Guss chart. I will also say, doing a little bit of in-house promotion here, if you are a patron of RHAP Has a Podcast, you get access to a nice handy-dandy chart that has a good amount of links to these seasons. A lot of charts, exactly. But we figured for this podcast, essentially what we would do is go over a lot of tenets of what Australian Survivor is. Suffice it to say, as great as AU versus the World was, it doesn't necessarily represent what Australian Survivor usually is in terms of structure and what to expect from a season. And then we're going to go through the, 11 seasons that have happened. Spoiler free, exactly. Yeah. We're not going to give away any sort of like placements or standout characters or anything. We're going to use a lot of vague terms, but to your point, Shannon, there are some really great seasons. There are some not so great seasons, but as I like to talk about, I think everyone can give every season a try and see what season is for them. So we're going to talk through each season in kind of its basic terms so that if that season appeals to you, you can seek that out. I'm sure we'll give some recommendations of like, okay, out of these, which are the good ones to start with, but consider this your handy-dandy, spoiler-free guide to what Australian Survivor is all about.
And I think the thing that's so great about Australian Survivor is it's such an extreme product that, like US Survivor, there's so many seasons and there's a lot of subjectivity to it. And I feel like there's more kind of a gray area on some things. Whereas I do think that we have reached a lot of a consensus around how to grade these seasons for Australian Survivor. And I also think that a lot of those middle tier seasons, or what might be defined as middle tier, like barely exist in Australian Survivor. Like that is either one of the best seasons of TV you've ever seen, or like an absolute nightmare. Because in 24 episodes, what used to be even more than 24 episodes, it's either like so long and terrible that you just want it to end, God make it stop kind of vibes, or it's like good enough and you're so invested and it's like, you want something great and you just keep getting more of it, like Homer and the Donuts. That's what Australian Survivor is like. So it actually is convenient because it's quite binary and I think quite easy to do. And another thing that's really convenient is that the seasons that the AUV World cast are on, so if you want to prepare for AUV World or if you've seen these characters in AUV World and want to know more, are the great ones. They like skipped over all the bad ones. So like you could have a very convenient, pretty much, you could have a very convenient road of knowing these characters to get to AUV World. So yeah, it's more simple than it is for the US, I think.
Well, let's start by talking about, again, some generalities that people should know about Australian Survivor, because you mentioned one right off the bat, Shannon. Again, Australia versus the world was a very different season. It was 14 players, it was 10 episodes. That is never the case with Australian Survivor. In Australian Survivor, bigger, sometimes better, to your point, most times better. But every single cast of Australian Survivor features a whopping 24 players, and perhaps to account for this, there will be upwards of 24 episodes a season. Much like AU versus the World, they'll usually air 3 times a week, usually 2 times a week. I know every episode of AU versus the World was around like an hour, 10 minutes without commercials. The run times tend to vary. Sometimes the second episode in a week tends to run like 50 minutes or so. But even so, these are long episodes of Survivor filled with many, many people.
Yeah, and you get really fun stuff with that. You get these 12-person tribes, almost always these 2-tribe kind of battle themes. And you get like really fun swaps. Like you basically watch 2 concurrent merges and then swap them and then merge. That's often very many people. So I think for a lot of the people in the US who've been missing that scale, I mean, Australian Survivor does it as a scale never seen before, but even if you miss kind of that old school US Survivor scale of just like 2 tribes and swaps and kind of more of those dynamics and like
final
bigger
2,
votes,
I would say I think
a lot
there's
of the time.
three Australian Survivor seasons where we haven't had a final 2, which also gets like into the next element of this. So because they have such a large episode order, again, 24 players and at least 24 episodes, one of the big things that, again, was missing from AU versus the World because of the cast size and episode order, but is, I would say, one of the trademarks of Australian Survivor, are what's called essentially non-elimination episodes. We're taking a page out of The Amazing Race, where sometimes we'll get 2, 3, sometimes maybe even 4, depending on how the season goes, episodes where a person will technically not be eliminated. Now, they have varied up how they've done this in the past. Like the first season, for example, they just like did a double swap episode and a double merge episode where it was kind of like a to be continued. But ever since then, they've usually associated it around some sort of twist. We've had things where people get voted over to the other tribe. Either the other people know that or don't know that until the person shows up the next day on the other tribe. We've seen cases sometimes where there'll be like a short-term redemption island concept where like the next 2, 3, 4 people are all voted into this purgatorial state where one of them or some of them are going to compete to come back into the game. We've even had some twists where it's like, here's something that can nullify a tribal council and make it a non-elimination episode. So that's something that is very big to know about Australian Survivor, is that you are not always going to get a person voted out every single episode.
Yeah, and that's going to be weird for you, okay? It was weird for us too, but you will get used to it. And then you'll just keep hoping that the non-elimination episodes are as painless as possible. And further into the series, I think that they start striking that balance, but kind of just have to accept that from the get-go. It was shocking to us as well in 2016, but it is a necessary evil to a degree of, having to have so many episodes and having to make more money from ads with longer episode orders. Also, just the way that Australian television is. We have multiple times a week. So that's just like competing with the landscape of TV. So it's the kind of thing where people still to this day are complaining, like, no more non-eliminates. Like, we're always going to need it. Like, we just hope that they do it as best as possible, basically.
Exactly. It's like a necessary evil, essentially. And that also sort of brings in the idea of twists in general. Australian Survivor, we'll talk about it. Seasons very much vary in terms of how many twists are brought in. You're going to see maybe a few kind of trademark versions that they've used time and time again. But really, I would say even more so than the US, Australia just really runs the gamut of twists that they use. Sometimes from, again, the most innocuous, especially from a non-elimination perspective, to honestly some of the most egregious I have ever seen. But again, and this is a show that's also cycled between a few showrunners as well, so there's a lot of consistently tried things. I was thinking about this, Shannon, in preparation for this podcast, and it kind of surprised me. Australian Survivor will sometimes go a bit idol hungry. They love the big plays. They love the idol moves. Surprisingly few advantages, I would say. We've had knowledge is power get used a couple times. We've had the idol nullifier show up. I mentioned the one before that nullifies a tribal council, but especially compared to how many they dole out in a given season of US, it is quite stunning that they have not sort of pulled out their own bag of tricks of, okay, you have this, you get an extra vote, you get a vote steal, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, the vote economy doesn't really exist in Australian Survivor most of the time. Sometimes the vote will not be sacred and it will be angering. And believe me, we felt that pain. When you see it, we felt it at the time too. But everything that you kind of know of the new era in terms of like journeys and the vote economy and like, they have shot in the dark and all of that really does not translate. So I think a lot of the things that people miss about US Survivor, the themes as an example, that type of more in which there are big twists, but like that kind of more pure voting energy, where people often mostly with caveats have their votes. And I think as well, some of it's a very different edit, which you'll have to get used to, which you might have seen from Australia versus the world, where it's a lot more main characters versus like, I don't know, not people who were barely on the show.
That's the big thing. It's stars and scrubs. I think that is probably one of the biggest things that I think, again, depending on how you like your storytelling, might put US above AU. Because I think especially in the new era, the US version makes an effort to have us get to know at least a little bit about everybody. Not the MO of Australian Survivor. They will take usually every season a select few characters, about 3 to 5, and we are going to hear a lot from them in pretty much every episode until they are voted out. We get a lot of confessionals. Again, it's a long run time, so we oftentimes get repetition in confessionals. I think Australian Survivor, more than others, is more visible about what we call Frankenbiting, right? Where you'll clearly see that they are taking splotches from different confessionals. You look at the different locations, the different outfits to piece together yeah, exactly. The beards. Sometimes people are even caught like wearing the merge buff in some of these, select shots. So again, it varies. I think that for some people, it's like, great, I get to see more of my favorite characters. This is fantastic. For others, it's like, oh my God, get this person off of my screen. But I would say, especially from an editing perspective, that is a major, major difference. If you think the US makes some characters quieter in comparisons to others, like in Australian Survivor sometimes make Purple Kelly look like Tony Vlachos.
But to be fair, confessionals, not that some people can't be completely invisible, but confessionals mean less in Australian Survivor. Yes. Tribal councils are very long. The challenges are a massive part of it. The mat chat is like a thing that I really think we've really defined in Australian Survivor, where people will talk across the mat to other tribes and really blow things up. But I think that Australian Survivor, the way that it has casted the way it casts and edits, is that it gets these stars and they become like icons of the franchise. So you'll also find like a lot of returnees will show up time and time again, which has not been a big part of recent US Survivor. The diversity is very bad. That's another big difference. The fandom diversity is good. At first, it's very stark. Like there's a couple of like real super fans and then people who have never seen the show, especially when Australian Survivor hadn't been on the air. So you had to be much more of a fan to kind of have watched any US Survivor lately. That I think has evened up more over time, but there's definitely like a kind of wide berth of fandom, which I know people have really missed. So I think that they do a lot of things to extremes, but some things that feel extreme in the new era in terms of the structure, the vote economy, the story base. Like we have a lot less of like the sob stories and like the personal stories.
Yeah, there's usually like a reward every season where they like get letters from home or some sort of personal memento when we get to know them. But pretty much the edit is going to be about like them in the game rather than them outside of the game. So I mean, for what it is, and I think a lot of people have been espousing this, but it bears mentioning again, I really do feel like Australian Survivor and US Survivor, especially in its current form, are really yin and yang. It depends on what you're looking from in the show. And if you're looking at one particular series and you're like, oh, I wish we didn't have that, chances are if you go over to the other version across the Pacific, it's going to have that. And so, again, to your point, I think, especially as of late, as people are maybe getting a little bit more fatigued of the new era and all of the twists and the vote economy, as you mentioned, and the fact that, again, we keep using the same format, people are more turning to Australian Survivor, feeling like, despite the fact that it has these huge casts and 24 episodes and sometimes throwing in its own wild twist, it still does kind of have that old school feel to it, to your point, where it's a little bit more based in people figuring things out as they go along. The structure is a little more basic. 2 tribes, final 2. You mentioned it before, though, as well. Something that's very interesting is that Australian Survivor uses a lot more celebrity casting than American Survivor ever really has. I think that even in the teens where US Survivor was bringing in a lot of people as sort of ringers from the sports world and entertainment world, we'll get into it. Australian Survivor, starting around like season 3, pretty much fills up like a quarter of their cast every season with notables.
Yeah, and I mean that like your mileage may vary on like I mean to the Americans who are watching, like those people will not be names you Stephen Bradbury, he showed up. That one is a name you've probably heard. But otherwise, yeah, they're like sports stars and they'll use themes to kind of get notable people onto it. But I think we've kind of spoken through the differences.
Yeah.
Should we look at some of these seasons? Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll I've got a nice little PowerPoint presentation
Oh, I love
prepared.
a PowerPoint.
Yeah, if you want to help me share that right now. But
Oh,
yeah,
right, I do that.
we will go through each season here. Now, let's start with sort of the naming here, because the first 2 seasons. So first off, we should say Australian Survivor did air 2 seasons originally back in the early 2000s when Survivor was all the rage around the world. Uh, you know, forgive me if I'm putting words in anyone's mouth. Shannon, feels like it didn't necessarily hit that big. And so we're talking specifically about the reboot of Australian Survivor. And I know there's some ticky-tack in the AU community about like, this is technically the 3rd season in general, but just for simplicity's sake, we are counting the reboot as its own franchise. So we'll talk about the first season that came out of this reboot in 2016.
Yeah, those were on different networks. I usually call things by their year or theme. So I call this AU 2016.
Yeah, which is a good thing to note as well. Yeah, we have not started with the themes here. The theme itself was like, wow, Survivor is back. So this was the first season that came out in 2016. You mentioned how the bigger tribes of 12 each has become a staple of Australian Survivor. It did not start that way. Some of you heard this before, Shannon, because it may or may not be something we'll be seeing very soon on American Survivor. Australian Survivor started with 3 tribes of 8 to reintroduce this concept to the audience.
Yeah. So this season, I feel like this is the one people argue over the most. I think that there is kind of a consensus that it's not liked. I certainly didn't enjoy it. I haven't watched it since 2016. There are definitely some characters in it that like you want to see that come back that are great. That's going to be true of, every season. But I think with 2016, my concern was that, the show would be bad and then it would embarrass me in front of the Survivor community. And like kind of, I mean, the next season of 2017 is one of the best seasons I think ever. And this is just, it's so long. You know, when I said like if it's bad, like it dragged. There are definitely highlights. People talk about the finale as one of the best finales of all time. It was fun that we got Survivor back. There are certainly some characters who are very important to this podcast and very important to the franchise. But I kind of feel like if you're looking to do the whole thing, then I mean, why listen to this podcast? Just watch every season. If you're looking to skip some of the worst, I would skip AU 2016 personally.
For what it's worth, I think it gets off to like a pretty fun start, especially again for this sort of open concept of we don't know what this is going to look like, right? You mentioned this before. You covered the reboot of Survivor UK, and there always is a little bit of trepidation as to like, have these people been watching US Survivor? How much do they know about the game? What will they bring into it? But I would say the pre-merge is interesting. It is a long pre-merge. It is a 12-episode pre-merge. That is the length of basically a US new era season. But I will say, what ends up happening without getting into too much is that there is a twist that kind of dictates the second half of the pre-merge. It doesn't necessarily make things less exciting, just a little more straightforward in some aspects. And it does hit a rough patch in the post-merge. I would argue
the rough patch is like, it's more than a patch. It's
I would argue this is one of, whenever I recommend Australian Survivor to people, that stretch is one of those ones where I'm like, you might just want to skip those episodes outright. Like
Yeah, who
they're
wants to
not.
do that?
It's not necessarily the strongest batch of episodes. It does pick up a little bit towards the end, culminating in, to your point, one of the best finales, not only in Australian Survivor history, but some are considering one of the best in global history, period. So, like you said, it's a bit of a mixed bag to start things off. I would not completely throw the baby out with the bathwater
I
because I
would
do think
throw
there
it
are
out.
some
Throw
interesting
out the
cast
baby.
members and moments. But
Throw it.
yeah,
Don't
it's
watch it.
not the strongest start to the reboot.
I think if you're watching this, watch every season. Like I pretty much like if your bar is that low, you might as well just do the whole journey.
Well,
Anyway.
let's get into brighter prospects here, because like you said,
Yes.
Australian Survivor does come back again for a second season, and they come back with a big one here. 2017, the last non-themed Australian Survivor season. They go to the 2 tribes of 12, and for lack of a better term, Shannon, it's a banger.
This is one of the best seasons of all time. It's one of the best newbie casts of all time. Many of them have returned in different reality shows as well and really defined the landscape of Australian TV over the last 8 years. The season is so, so good. It's a great place to start because it's all newbies. It's, really right towards the beginning there, to the point where on a podcast last week, I said Australian Survivor 2017 to 2025 so far. And Rob was like, didn't start in 2016. And I was like, I pushed it out of my memory. It's such a good season. It's such a good place to start. It's obviously not that old school because it was still pretty recent. And you can follow a lot of the journeys of these players. It's so good. And like people think that it kind of slows down towards the end game. I've actually never really thought that. I mean, compared to maybe some other seasons as well. I think the thing with Australian Survivor is you're used to pre-merges in the US being a little more lackluster, and then it like ramps up at the merge. In Australian Survivor, again, with these 2 concurrent merges, that is the pre-merge and then swaps, the pre-merge is often even better. And then maybe it slows down towards the end because it's so long. But I still think that this survives that well. It's really fun. It's really funny. It's very long because I think this was 26 episodes before
I'm
we
pretty
were
sure, yeah.
55 days. Yeah.
It's
But
wild.
it's worth it. It's so good. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there's just so many standout characters who end up, going out from the beginning to make it all the way to the end. I think that 2017 could be an example of, again, something that we are now to expect in New Era Survivor, which is, as you coined in Australia, the tall poppy syndrome, right? Which maybe contributes to some of those people's feelings, as you were mentioning, of like these big characters and big presences will sometimes get to like 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, and then get cut, rather than, again, they've sort of adapted the editing, I feel like, later on to more so be like, hey, these are the people you should care about because they're going to be in the final 3, final 2. But sometimes in these earlier seasons, they're just editing these big characters that don't necessarily make it all the way to the end. But that's not to bemoan the people who did make it to the end, because there just is so much good stuff here. Like right off the bat, you could tell there's sort of a lot of great storylines happening, where there's a lot of big power ships happening on, honestly, both tribes. And we should also mention, right there in the bottom right corner, if you're watching the YouTube version of this, and we'll point this out throughout without getting into placement spoilers, this is the King of the Jungle, Luke Toki's original season of Australian Survivor.
And Sarah, for the people watching
And Sarah as well, yes.
Australia versus the world. So again, this season has its fingerprints all over Australian Survivor. It's very important. You're going to keep watching the franchise, and it's also great. It's a no-brainer. Start here. Okay, let's go to Champions versus Contenders 1, what I usually call AU 2018, because CVC 1, I don't know why I start theming it around Brains v Brawn. But this season is interesting to me because, as I've usually said, it's always very bad or very good with no in between. This season had both of those things for me. This season did have Russell Hantz, if this was the first foray into casting American players, and it does have important players. This is Shawnee's first season as well. But I think that the pre-merge is quite hard. But then I think that the post-merge is so good. So it's the kind of thing where it's like, if you can be bothered going through a tough pre-merge, I do think it's probably worth it, and it amounts to being a good season overall. But I feel like, to me, it's got both sides of it.
Yeah, so let's talk about this theme, because this is the first one that Australian Survivor will introduce. And, I would say technically they predate David versus Goliath, though they were probably filming at the same time. But it's very similar to David versus Goliath. Again, what you'll figure out with Australian Survivor in particular is that these themes are incredibly loose. But basically, it's this idea of like people who are leaders in their respective fields versus like those that are up and comers in the world. And again, you look at each person, especially on the Contenders tribe, we'll talk about this next season, and you're like, really? you're not a champion, you're a contender, but it sets up a narrative fairly interestingly. This is when we really start to pipe in a lot of a celebrity casting because of the theme. We're getting some sports stars, we're getting some well-known public figures. You mentioned Russell Hantz sort of showing up in that variety, even though ironically enough, he had not won a Survivor season up to that point. This is a season where one tribe, I would say, is kind of riveting to watch in terms of there's a lot of drama and dynamics that are happening, not so much with the other tribe. I absolutely see your point, and I agree with it to a certain extent that like that can also lead to a bit more of a rote pre-merge watch. But yeah, even at the time, JLP in his narration at the merge episode is like, they're calling it the best post-merge in Australian Survivor history. Kind of weird because it's only the third season, but like has some really, really good stuff in it. Some major flips, some big blind sides, some big moves happening as, all the way up to the final, the
To the
final
end.
3 vote. Yeah, to the right
Yeah.
over to the end. And like you said, this is the original season of Shawnee, and she shines, for lack of a better term, from the very beginning.
Yeah. So this is the one. There's two that are kind of in the middle, where it's like you decide for me. The others I'm more definitive on. All right. So they went right back to champions versus contenders too.
Up to
In
the point where I
2019.
accidentally used the same photo.
Are they all going to be wrong? No.
No, it's
All
fine.
right. You're going to have to
Apologies to
picture
CBC too.
the champions versus contenders 2 cast. Champions, don't want to look at it. It's like I'm getting confused
Blur
about what
your
the season
eyes.
is. Yeah, so they went back to the well, but the well was better because Champions versus Contenders 2 is a great season. Also highly recommend. Luke comes back. It's David's first season. There's a lot of Janine's first season. Like there's a lot of great characters and it's really fun. It's a really fun pre-merge. It never really slows down, I don't think. I think this season is the one that you really think about in terms of the wonky edit. Like I really feel like they amped up that extremes in terms of main characters and people barely on the show more than ever in ways that might infuriate you. But like the people they give us are great. There are some incredible characters, and I highly recommend this season.
Yeah, so I would say almost like CBC 1, this is another season that, especially the first quarter, is kind of dictated by a lot of drama and a lot of intrigue happening on one tribe in particular. The other one, maybe not so much, which does contribute to a bit of that unbalanced edit. But yeah, this is where you saw David and Luke bro down as soon as they hit the beach on Australia versus the world. This is their origin story. And David, especially, Luke becomes the first ever returnee in Australian Survivor history. He comes on, spoiler alert, as a champion. They call him the People's Champion in a manner of speaking. But David also hits the ground running as just a massive character. He's making big moves, sometimes questionable moves. He's delivering in terms of the airtime. And I would say, the momentum pretty much continues in the post-merge. I would say this is one where the pre-merge is probably more exciting than the post-merge, but that's not to bemoan. Yeah, but it's not to bemoan the post-merge whatsoever. I think that's still incredibly exciting. There's some big characters that make, some questionable plays, I would say, and it leads to a very intriguing final couple of episodes.
Yeah, this is when I started covering the show. There should be podcasts from season 1 even. I mean, just you guys can, again, like Google, just Google it. Yeah, I think, Mike's got the actual.
There we go. Don't want to do a disservice.
Yeah, just telling people to Google things like Russell Hantz did. But yeah, I mean, there should be coverage. Rob and Steven did the first season, then Nick did the second and third, and then I went in from 2019. But what was I going to say about this season? Oh yeah, you said that it was like one entertaining tribe, like 2018. I feel like this was so much more entertaining. Like I don't think anyone in the pre-merge was doing anything even remotely comparable entertainment-wise to how fun this season was. A lot of great plays here now that I can see them on my screen. Harry is going to be important. A lot of these people come back. Everyone comes back a lot. There's a lot of returning seasons, but anyway, some fun characters.
And I would also say, without teasing the identity too much, I would say one of the most fun lies that I've ever seen in Survivor history comes from this season.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun moments. So watch that one. We can go back now to All Stars.
Yeah,
All
so
Stars, yeah,
a,
the
a
first
little a
all
little
returning
wild,
season.
right? Yeah, you think on paper like, oh my god, it's only been 4 seasons. Why are we doing All Stars? It makes sense at the time, considering that again there were like 96 at least people to pull from, given the fact that there were 24 people every
Well,
season.
95, Luke.
Oh yeah, I guess not. Yeah, plus Luke. They could have brought Luke back a third time if they wanted to. But yeah, this is Australian Survivor All Stars, where they brought back 24 standout players of all different varieties. Some of them were, pre-merge memorable boots. Some of them made it all the way to the end. There are a couple winners maybe that end up making their way back here as they do battle as the best of the best.
Yeah, dude, this is such a bad season. Do not watch this. This is so bad. This is I don't know. I think Chappelle's always telling people to watch this season. I'm like, please stop. I hated this, but I was also going through like a pretty bad time mentally. I
I
don't know
mean,
how
this
much of
yeah.
it
So
was
we should also
caused
say
by the
this
season.
this came out in because Australian Survivor up to this point had aired in like July and August. This was the first time that they were intending at the time, at least, to film and air 2 seasons in a year. So they said, okay, we're going to shift this back to January and February. And if you were around during January and February 2020, you might have known what might have hit that may or may not have contributed, Shannon, to your mental well-being at that time.
Well, I think as well, like this kind of becomes to me the first era of Australian Survivor, and then we're going to shift into the new era. I think with the next season, Brains v Brawn, which was over a year later due to the COVID break. But I think for me, it's like very long seasons that are painful when they're bad, but then add in it's like people you love, or like I mean, literally some of them, but even just from the screen was so frustrating. Now, this is what's so hard is like you're going to want to watch this because this is going to have plays in it that you love. If you watched even just like 2017 and 2019 or the first 4 seasons, like you will want to watch it. And I get it because there are important stories. Like Shawnee comes back and David comes back and a lot of these players come back. I get it. I wish you well when you feel like you need to watch All Stars, and it's not, it drags, and it's not it's so few fun moments. It's just like not fun at all. But anyway, good luck to you.
I mean, that's the thing. If you're a US fan, you've heard this song before, right? This is a bit comparable to the US All Stars, where again, not to get into too much, but I think you end up seeing a lot of bigger, highly expected characters going early. The end game is more so kind of dominated by a group of people where you're kind of wondering, like, were you even All Stars to begin with? We should also mention as well, this was one of the twistier seasons. I mean, listen, doesn't hold a candle to what we're going to get into next. But I remember like every batch of 3 episodes, essentially every weekly assortment of episodes, there was some sort of twist involved in it. And maybe part of it was, again, wanting to account for the episodes. Part of it might have been like, well, these are returning players, so we have to keep them on their toes. But there's, again, a wide-ranging allotment of twists they use in this season in particular.
It is so strange to think that this is the one season of Australian, like full Australian returnees, because there's so many returning opportunities, but like always in these hybrid situations. So this is All Stars again. Good luck. Brains v Brawn is also Mike. You had one job.
I know. I'll bring it up. Copy paste betrayed me.
Picture. Brains v Brawn won. Season 6. So this came back after the COVID hiatus in mid-year 2021. And it's such an extreme season. It's a season of extreme personalities. I think some of the best characters in Australian Survivor. This is George's first season. Mm-hmm. It's a season of extreme twists. Like, there was always something happening. And it got to the point where maybe this is the most, disagreed upon season, because I think for some people it was too much. Yeah. But then I think for a lot of people, myself included, it was just so good and so entertaining. Here we are. And it's also in the Australian Outback because we were having to record locally, but it's just so good and it's so entertaining that even though there are moments that are so angering, and there are definitely like some of the worst moments in the show, but it's so good that it covers for that. Like, that's how good it is. And Rob and I covered it again. So if you want coverage on this, we have it from 2021. And then Rob and I did it again in 2023? Mm-hmm. Wow, that was only 2 years later. It felt like a lifetime. That's crazy to think that was 2 years ago. But anyway, so Rob and I covered it. We did a rewatch. So if you want to listen to that, you can as well. But when I rewatched it, I was even more entertained, even more like, especially like knowing what would happen and not being like angered in the moment by the twists because I'd already like felt those feelings and like it had already passed years ago. I just enjoyed it. And it really is like, it's such a good time. I think you had like what I think I always say, like, proceed with caution in this season because you have to know like those extreme elements of it. But then it's also such a good time. It never slows down. It's probably my favorite endgame ever in anything. Some of my favorite episodes of Survivor, some of my favorite streaks in Survivor. It's so good. What do you think about this season?
Yeah, so let's talk about the theme first and foremost. You know, we are certainly now going to get into the era of Australian Survivor where they are pulling themes from the US version. Obviously, Survivor US succeeded in my opinion, 2 different times with the brains versus brawn versus beauty theme. They just dropped the beauty. They're all beautiful in Australian Survivor. So they just went with brains versus brawn. And what I will say is that this season gets going really from the jump. I think there is a lot of, honestly, like it's weird to describe this season as like mess, but it kind of is. Like I think you have some really great gameplay and really some all-time moves get pulled off here from a few particular players. It is sort of counterbalanced by especially a few select players making all-time blunders and just moments where you have your head in your hands being like, why did they think they were able to do this? But again, if you are someone who's into this season for like, oh my God, I need all these expert level people going head to head with each other, you're not necessarily going to get that. But if you want more so that kind of like Gabon Survivor 46 messiness of like everyone's trying and not a lot of people are succeeding in that variety, Brains versus Brawn is incredibly entertaining. The biggest sticking point against it is this is far and away the twistiest season in Australian Survivor history. They brought on a new showrunner for this. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Shannon. I believe they were like a previous showrunner on maybe Big Brother. And it definitely shows because they mix in these advantages and non-elimination twists and short time twists flagrantly throughout, egregiously. I would say this contains, in my opinion, my least favorite twist in Survivor history globally. You know, there's a bunch of stuff
and even
that has,
so,
but even so, it succeeds.
yeah.
And I think I said at the time, even like this is a season that succeeded in spite of what production was trying to do because this cast was eager to play from the jump. Some of them, you know, used the twist to their advantage. Some of them did not, but it is an absolute roller coaster of a season from beginning to end, and it is massively and messively entertaining.
But with the mess, like there are some of the best moves in Survivor here. Like there's some really great gameplay as well. So I don't think like it's just full mess. Like there are people that are great. I also think, like, firstly, why are so many cast photos popping up in my backstage here? Like, what have you done?
I was throwing this together at the last second, and the copy and paste wasn't working.
I must see the PowerPoint. So.
Yeah, I just used the All-Stars photo again. I mean, makes sense given the fact that that's what we'll get into. Quite a number of returning players show up.
Okay. Just I'm like, all I saw was like, I'm like, wait, how bad is the PowerPoint that I just keep seeing Guss photos jump up here?
This is why I don't work in a corporate setting anymore, Shannon, okay? I can't make a PowerPoint for my damn life.
The fact that I was like, oh, yay, a PowerPoint. The PowerPoint was like such a colossal disappointment.
Wow. Okay.
Sorry. It was a disappointment.
All right, you got me there, okay? I will accept the massive insults for the pun. You know where to hit me, Guss.
So few people are going to understand. Like, so few people need to listen to this and they're going to understand how much I'm enjoying this. Anyway, I wanted to say that...
See, look, if you want to relish in people's mistakes, watch Australian Survivor Brains versus Brawn.
I'm crying. We would have thought that this podcast would be the one. It was just a PowerPointment. I think I made myself. But anyway, what I wanted to say was that there are 4 really important returnees in this season. I come back on Heroes versus Villains. You know, it's kind of like how the 4 Micronesia players are so important on Heroes versus Villains. Like, it's that era that's like, it's right before, like a couple of years before, and it's like this block on another really great season, and Heroes versus Villains is so good. So, like, you're going to want to watch Heroes versus Villains, and you should watch this as a precursor to that. Anyway, skipping over not to the next PowerPoint, but to the next cast.
Wow. Thank you. To a season that maybe we'd advise people to skip altogether. This is
a lot of people's least favorite season.
Yeah, so this is blood versus water, true to the similar US theme. This brings on pairs of loved ones, and starts at least by putting them on separate tribes. And this one is a little bit different, to quote JLP, because it sort of mixes together blood versus water 1 and 2 from the US, in that we get the vast majority of them are all newbies, all newbie pairs coming in together. We do have, I believe it's 3 returning players from Australian Survivor. And then we have Sandra. Sandra Diaz
Yeah.
Twine shows up, and making her debut, interestingly, on Australian Survivor is the American daughter of Sandra, Nina Twine.
It's such a random cast. Like
Yeah.
it's so like why the players they chose. Like they have one like couple from Australian Survivor, and then they have like one other returnee
Yep.
with his sister for reasons, and then Sandra, and then newbies. And there's not a lot of fans in this cast. Like there are some icons, I will say. There's like one
Which comes
particular
with sort of the
icon.
blood versus water territory, right? Like if you're casting 2 people, they both might not be big fans of the show, and so you sort of kind of get these come with people. And sometimes, listen, there are people who impress coming on as the loved one of sort of
Yeah.
the main appeal to be brought on. Sometimes it's not necessarily the case. I mean, I think the big thing to know is that this is another season where there's an entire stretch of episodes where I recommend outright people do not watch. Where, listen, I'll just get into it. There's a streak where people are voted into purgatory, and then the vast majority of them are brought back immediately. So it feels like almost one of those times where you're like, why is this worth watching? The post-merge is definitely pretty stagnant. Now, there are some really interesting and highly discussed moves that are made.
Yes.
One of them considered maybe one of the most brutal moves made in Australian Survivor history. But I think this is one of those cases where, like, if you are not a fan of the main characters of this season, you are not going to be a fan of this season.
Yeah, it's very heavy. Like, yes, there are
Yeah.
some very interesting moments, but it's all kind of like a little dark. Like, even at the time, it was like we're discussing a lot about like people's marriages and people's relationships. Some of the relationships were like the brother and boyfriend of the same person who was not on the show, who was a celebrity, and who actually will go on to marry another person in this
Yes.
cast. Well, not married, but they have 2 kids. Which is just a crazy. So it's almost worth it for that lore alone. No, it's not. It's not worth it for that. It's just like there were some really interesting moments that we debated, but did we ever have fun? Like, not a huge amount of fun, to be honest. Not really. So, and this one is like, it's also not that important yet. It's also a lot later, but it's not that
Yeah.
important in terms of the returnees. Like, we do have Nina comes back, Geordie comes back. Is that it?
That's it.
Yeah, so far, yeah. So this one probably is the least relevant in terms of like what you're going to get quality wise, and then like how much you need to know. Like AU 2016, it's the first season, it sets it up. There are players you may need to know. Like All Stars is obviously going to be part of the journey of a lot of players that you know, but this is not even doing that. So it's just not that important, I don't think. But
so
yeah.
you could argue that we hit the low point of Australian Survivor. Again, your mileage may vary, your kilometers may vary with this, but luckily we followed up with a pretty dang good 1-2 punch, Shannon. And the
Yes, we
PowerPoint
can
does
go
work
back
this
to the
time.
We'll see what the well, we don't know yet. Heroes versus villains. So this is a hybrid season that is pretty much half returnees, but not exactly. For
Yeah,
reasons
I
that
think it's like it's 11 versus
11.
13. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, this is such a fun season though. Like this has the episode that everyone always talks about that kind of put Australian Survivor on the map. Episode 7 that the
Made the New York
New York Times said
Times.
was one of the best episodes of TV in 2023. It's just so good. Like I think from the not the very beginning. The premiere's not great. After that, it's so good, I think. Yeah, there'll be a lot of players that you care about coming back. And it's just a really fun time. This one is definitely one to watch.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a very weird theme season, and maybe we'll get into this with the season that's coming up in the near future. But it's heroes versus villains, and it's hybrid. But it's basically like each tribe is half returnees and half newbies. So the newbies are coming in and either being cast as a hero or a villain. And your mileage may vary again as to like who is affronted by being called a villain, who takes being called a hero on the chin. But yeah, this is a season that gets off to a little bit of a slower start, but really picks up. This is another one where there's like one tribe in particular, especially pre-swap, that is just full of so much interesting and invigorating content. I mean, listen, I'll go into it a little bit. Much like Heroes versus Villains US proper, the Villains tribe has a lot of chaos going on. The Heroes tribe, maybe not so much, and whether it's due to the theme or the people that were cast. This season also features, I think, a couple of moments that are maybe some of the most viral moments that have popped out of Australian Survivor, where, one contestant will tell another one that she feels more African-American than her because
Oh,
she
that
lives
one,
in
see, the
Africa.
premiere was bad. The premiere,
Yeah.
yeah.
But there's another one, of a cheekily, quite literally placed idol as well that has also made its way around the
That
internet. This
one's
is
more
just a
fun.
yeah, this is a very fun season overall. I think the post-merge, kind of like Heroes versus Villains US proper, is one of these things where, like, one big alliance makes a few really fun plays towards the beginning. I will say that this season is really anchored by the returnees. Despite only making up half the cast, it's very kind of like Micronesia coded, where these returnees absolutely bring it. This is where George and Shawnee will both get brought back. This is where you heard a little bit about, their own sort of history on AU versus the world. This is where it starts, but cannot recommend this season highly enough. Again, if you haven't watched some of these people's previous seasons, it might spoil just how they did previously, but it doesn't really matter because the stuff they bring on this season, even without prior knowledge, is so good.
I do think Watch Brains v Brawn. Like, I do think that is a really good, like, they're kind of like a 1-2 punch, but there are really good storylines here. But without spoiling, it is a bit tough, but it's a lot of fun. It's really, really good. I mean, look at that, like, yellow and purple. What a wonderful, even color combination. It's iconic. It's super fun. People complain that it slows down a little. I was having fun with it the whole time. It's just, yeah, highly recommend this season. I don't know if do we have more on the season? No?
No, I mean, let's get into the next one here because if you want a really good season and you don't need to be spoiled on previous returnees placements, may I introduce you folks to the gloriousness that is Titans versus Rebels, which at the time we were kind of calling Champions versus Contenders 3, right? Because this theme doesn't really make any sense.
Titans versus Rebels is such a good season. It may be the best season of Australian Survivor. People have said, Puya says it's his favorite season in Global Survivor
it's mine
history.
as well, yeah.
Yeah, really? Of all time?
Not of all time, no. Of definitely of Australian Survivor.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Titans v Rebels is it's a newbie season, so you can start with this one if you want. If you're like, oh, the best ever. Like, I think start at 2017 and work your way up. If you're impatient, you can do it. But you should know that what Australian Survivor does is it wrecks or ruins the spoils, I should say, the prior season or sometimes prior seasons.
Yeah, we should have said for 2017, if you don't watch 2016 and you don't want to know what happens, do not watch like the first 5 minutes of Australian Survivor 2017.
Usually like the first minute. Yeah, like JLP will be like, last year, this person won. You're like, oh, come on. So I am usually giving that spoiler warning, but you can start with Titans v Rebels. It's so fun. It's all newbie cast, and it never slows down. I think from the first episode is so good, and it's so good throughout. Like, I've never seen a season so chaotic that changes so many times that won't let me rest for 1 second. Like, if you want to see 24 episodes that are all good,
yes,
this is a season for you. And I think, and then like other seasons aren't really much below that, but I mean, the bar is high, and Titans v Rebels, I think, clears that bar.
That's the thing for me, is that, again, you come into Australian Survivor with some base level expectations. Not all 24 episodes are going to be bangers. You're not going to get a lot of story from all 24 cast members. This is the exception to me. This feels like maybe the sole, maybe besides 2017 Australian Survivor season, where it feels like everyone kind of had a storyline, or you knew something a little bit about everybody. Everybody had a big role to play. You would say that even the post-merge, again, we've said for multiple seasons here, even some of the most beloved ones, that like, yeah, maybe it slows down towards the end game of the post-merge. The post-merge was the most unpredictable in Australian Survivor history, where like it wasn't even voting blocks. It was just people moving independently, individually, each and every episode, where you could never tell what was going to happen. It contains one of the most deliciously complex dynamics that I have ever seen across 25 years in Survivor. If you watched AU versus the World, this is Kirby's original season. And if you got a taste as to like the je ne sais quoi she brings to that season, just wait until Titans versus Rebels.
Yeah, and it's like we haven't seen any other attorneys but Kirby, but obviously this was only last year, so the hope is many more will come back, maybe one hopefully soon. They could cast so much of this cast again in future seasons. So the hope is that that is what we do. So yeah, highly recommend this season. We will keep going here to Brains v Brawn 2. This was only earlier this year. This
Yeah.
one is the weirdest one for me because this is the most mid-season we have. I truly
Yeah.
think, like I said, like everything's an extreme. Even 2018 is two extremes and make it mid. But this is like, I mean, I think I enjoyed it more than most. I think the edit's not great. I think the story is better than the edit showed. I think the cast is good and bad.
Yeah, I would say this is one case where one tribe kind of contains a lot of the entertaining forces that exist on this season. And the good news is that we see them
Definitely.
often enough that it
Yeah.
makes that pre-merge pretty fun. You know, there is like a certain alliance that, again, continuing to talk about complicated dynamics, like you never knew every episode how they were going to be. Are they on? Are they off? Who's working with whom? Who's feuding with whom? And that dictates a lot of the post-merge as well. But I agree, it's kind of hard, especially now that we're examining this like months after the fact, to kind of like place a finger on how you feel about this season, because it definitely did not hit the doldrums of like certain patches of 2016 and All Stars and Blood versus Water. But there are sparing moments where it really hit the high highs of some other seasons as well. You know,
Yeah.
it's like a fairly replacement level Australian Survivor season.
Which is so rare in Australian Survivor. Like, the chart that I have with different colors, like if we have like 3 red seasons for me for 2016, All Stars and Blood versus Water, and then like a lot of green seasons, and then pretty much just this and 2018, which is in the yellow of like, yeah, if you want to. I enjoyed it, I think, more than most. I think there's fun stuff there. I think the pre-merge is more fun than the post-merge.
I would agree with that. And I think it's also a weird situation where I guess there was stuff happening behind the scenes where like certain characters, including endgame ones, will be severely under edited. Where this is a season where very much you could see the utilization of the edit to be like, hey, here are the main characters of the
Yeah.
season, and you're going to see a lot of them.
Because these are the good characters. I think it's a tale of two casts very much,
Yes, yes.
and it like has to rely on some players, but those players are fun.
Yeah.
So I think I enjoy it more than most people, but it depends how much you want to. We've not seen anyone come back yet, but this
Nope.
was this year, so we'll see how it goes. Do we have more?
I mean, we have.
We
I put
yeah.
Australia versus the world here. Chances are you've seen this season if
You should
you're
watch
sticking.
Australia versus the world. Go through the journey to get here last.
Yes, because
Yeah.
it is so freaking good. I think if we're talking about it in particular from the Australian player's perspective, I think any estimates you would have as to like what certain relationships might be going in promptly get blown up once everyone's feet hit the sand, which is ideal for an all-star season, right? Like that's what you want. You don't want these seasons that are essentially dictated by prior relationships. They make things incredibly exciting. Without getting into too much, I think the edit does speak to one person particularly dominating things, but it doesn't make anything any less exciting. And even talking about the world tribe as well, obviously, if you're a US fan, basically half of them in the form of Suri, Parvati, and Tony. But I feel like everyone else on that tribe as well, the other 4 members, are no slouches. I think they all kind of prove their own worth from their own unique perspectives in the season. There are a couple people that I feel like are pretty gravely under edited just due to the circumstances of it all, but such an enjoyable season. Some people call it one of their, if not one of their favorite Australian Survivor seasons, like one of their favorite returnee seasons ever. It's incredibly strong. It's only 16 days. It's only 14 players. It's only 10 episodes, but what a 10 episode stretch.
And if that is all you've watched and you think that was amazing, I honestly think that the green seasons we just discussed are as good. Like, I think
Yeah.
you will get some. I mean, it's very different because it's so long. And I don't think that this is like, well, that's by far the best compared to some of those seasons. I think people would put things like Titans Variables higher, or Heroes versus Villains, or 2017. So basically, there are 3 tiers that we have given you. Now we
Oh,
can
yeah.
close the PowerPoint.
Yes.
It was so good, Mike. It was so good.
Oh my God. Thank you. You're not lying
So
to me, right?
no, so good. So the 3 tiers: green tier, 2017, 2019, which is Champions Contenders 2, Brains v Brawn 1, Heroes Villains, Titans v Rebels, those 5 seasons, and AUV World. I honestly think all 6 of those seasons are worth your time. If you really want great Survivor, if you just want to watch a couple seasons, like you could pick any, like
Yeah,
they're all
honestly.
good. Maybe go to Titans v Rebels if you want one or something. But I think go for all 6. Like that's genuinely how high I'm putting those 6, because I think they're all great. Then if my yellow season, so you do those 6, and then chronologically you also could add in 2018, Champions versus Contenders 1, and Brains v Brawn 2. And then if you want to do it all, then you would add in the other 3 seasons, 2016, All-Stars, and Blood vs. Water. I think those are the 3 tiers. But if 6 very long seasons or 5 long seasons in AUV World seems like a lot, I get it, but they're really good. Like, they are up there with some of the best Survivor globally. Highly recommend. Yeah, and then I guess, yeah.
I mean, the last thing I would want to mention is like, hey, if you are looking for more Australian Survivor and you don't want to go into the backlog, you only need to wait seemingly maybe like 4 or 5 months at the most, because there will be a new season coming out next year. We will have
longer.
Yeah, we have, well, considering, Shannon's personal timeline, we will have a new host. The venerated JLP, unfortunately, is not continuing with the program. So we will have David will be the host. And it's been announced, right, I believe, as Australian Survivor Redemption. So again, this is one of these
as well.
With some returnees. We don't know if this is going to translate to an outright Redemption Island concept, given the similarity in names, or whether it's, again, this loosey-goosey idea of like, you all need redemption in your lives, which again is very odd in terms of newbie casting, but we should be seeing another season coming up. So again, this is sort of like your guide to going back and binging some of these seasons while you wait for that. Otherwise, again, we have a US season to also keep your appetites, sated on the way to it. Just wait until early next year when Australian Survivor Redemption arrives on our screens and you can watch another season live with all of us.
It's hard because they said Redemption Island. I was like, okay, cool, I can have a kid. And then I was like, maybe not Island? Wait, is there Redemption Island or not? Now I am having a kid. So yeah, that helped me make that decision, but now I don't know. Also, we could do this in the future. We could do a sequel on other international seasons. We could do like a UK, New Zealand, South Africa thing if people want that.
Especially again, if you've watched Us versus the World and you want more of a guide to these specifically English-speaking international seasons, because as Shannon has done so well over the past near decade, there's a lot of great stuff out there.
And there's coverage, right? So there's coverage for all of this, and there's coverage for all the English-speaking Survivor that we've done on RHAP. So that's pretty much it. Mike, what else do you have going on?
Well, as I mentioned before, and if you're just looking for more Survivor in general, can I interest you in Survivor 49, which is premiering a little over a week at the time we are recording this. You know that I've got a lot of coverage going on there in the preseason interviews with all the cast members over at Parade. We'll be doing exit press there as well, doing the B&B with Liana. And then the other big thing I've got going on this fall is the Big Brother Amazing Race Hybrid season, which is coming out the day after. So if you are a fan of any of those shows, check out all the coverage I have going on there on RHAP. Otherwise, you can check out everything I'm doing at a Mike Bloom Type.
Well, if you watch AUV World, we're doing a lot of post-season coverage. We know globalsurvivor.com for all of that. At Shannon Gates, I had, I'm not going to say it, I guess, in case you haven't seen AUV World, but I've been doing a lot of exit interviews and post-season interviews. So that is all happening. Follow the coverage for all of that. But that's going to be us here. I hope this has been helpful to the people who want to start their Australian Survivor journey. Hope you enjoy. Good luck with All Stars for the people who bravely choose to do it. Thank you, Mike. As always, wonderful PowerPoint, incredible job. Look at you. You butchered the PowerPoint as much as I just butchered saying the word PowerPoint.
Same equal opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you to our team behind the scenes. Thank you all. And I will see you next time. Bye.
This is RHAP. We know reality TV.